he basically says he's on a TRT replacement dose, or like even when he was Mr. Olympia, essentially implying I took 100 milligrams of test a week plus 50 milligrams of Dianabol. To be clear though, Schwarzenegger does not want anyone duplicating his regimen, as if it's like the most egregious regimen ever. It's like literally borderline replacement, bro. What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we are talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger finally, in all caps, revealing his training secrets as well as his steroid protocol. This is something he very infrequently touches on. Seems like once every decade he might make a quick mention of it, but he very infrequently gets into actual specifics and compound selection as well. It's kind of interesting that he is mentioning it so specifically in this interview and reinforces of his previous statements versus not. And we'll get into that shortly because he has talked about this before, and we actually just had a coincidentally like exact same similar scenario with Tom Platz. We talked about, you know, comparing what he's talking about nowadays as what he did in the Olympia heydays versus what he actually said he did back in those days, and how there was like a pretty significant differential between them. At least he made it sound like that dosage was something that he does use, and then in here he, you know, doesn't mention it necessarily. Like, you can go watch the video, but basically he says like a difference of half a gram of shit essentially per week, which even at the peak dosage, a lot of people will be skeptical of that, but it is what it is. Like, a lot of these guys, is it just that they're misremembering because it's literally like 30, 40 plus years ago, or is it that they are intentionally underplaying their use to highlight their genetic superiority, hard work to not diminish it, adherence to diet, etc.? Because the last thing guys who bust their ass in the gym want is for people to just assume, oh, it's the drugs, because unfortunately, the lack of education around this stuff leads the layman to assume. It's shocking how many people still think, oh, if I took steroids, like I could be a Mr. Olympia competitor, or, you know, I look like a pro bodybuilder. Like, a lot of people out there actually do believe that if they injected themselves with gear, they would look like a bodybuilder. They think that's how it works. You just become jacked as hell and could compete on stage and be competitive with the likes of, you know, an Arnold or something. And it's absolutely not the case. It's shocking how primitive the understanding is still about this stuff, but it's understandable because it's still kind of an exotic, you know, niche, taboo topic. So anyways, Arnold, he does interview with Men's Health, basically walks him around to do his workout and stuff and gives some of his training principles and whatnot. And then I don't know why Men's Health does this, but they will have like a separate interview that is in verbal format that they then like transcribe into written articles, and they don't get it on video. And I don't understand why, because this is great material. Like, why would you not record it and put it on YouTube as well? So they have this article by Ebenezer Scrooge, just kidding, Ebenezer Samuel, published May 24th, 2023. So in here, they talk about him explaining his Olympia-Era PED use. So pretty fucking interesting. In our cover story, the Governor finally settles that debate. It turns out Schwarzenegger built his PED regimen around two drugs, testosterone and D-bol. Boom! Quick note from our sponsor of today's video, AG1 by Athletic Greens. This is the greens powder that I was hoping for some green dust to float up from out of here for dramatic effect. This is the greens powder I use as a supplement right now, given that I feel I don't get enough greens in my diet. Would I say this is a replacement for greens? No, I would not. However, I am just so lackluster in that area and value efficiency so much that for me, a greens powder makes sense. So, you know, depending on the context of your situation, if you're somebody in a similar boat to me where time is of the essence, you are literally just like not gonna go buy greens and wash them and like make a fucking giant salad or whatever. This is where the utility of something like this comes into play. And if I can get a fraction of the benefits, but with the time efficiency of literally slamming this in 10 seconds, that is what I love about this stuff. So they have an array of attributes, like it's 75 minerals, vitamins, whole foods, superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens in one daily serving. It's a special blend that is meant to support gut health, immunity, energy, recovery, focus, and aging. For me, the main attribute and takeaway is the greens component at the end of the day. It has, you know, a multitude of things as mentioned, including digestive enzymes, a mushroom complex, and could otherwise hit multiple different vectors of like supplementation needs. Like if you were using different products that were meant for antioxidant potential or digestive enzymes and whatnot, like you might otherwise be able to get a bit of a two birds, one stone effect with this product, because it is pretty multifaceted in what they try to put into this thing. Like it has gone through, I think, like 50 plus iterations, 52 to be exact, over the last decade to really dial in their formula, which is respected from me as a formulator myself to see them put that many changes and alterations into it, given the more evolving literature that comes out. And for me, it is ultimately, like I said, a convenience thing, and it is a highly trusted brand. So for me, you know, them reaching out to collaborate with me, this is a product I was already looking at via people that otherwise I feel are trustworthy and credible in the space. And, you know, this is one of the main go-tos in the industry. So I gave it a shot, liked it. It's been a part of the channel for a while now, and I feel like you guys might as well. It does not taste like ass either, fortunately, which a lot of these products really do. So if you want to check it out, you can also get a free bottle of vitamin K2 D3 with it, which is one of the most primary supplements I would recommend for many people. This one is like, while this is not like a necessity for by any means, a lot of people like this actually is a necessity. So getting a free 600 serving supply of K2 D3 with it with your order, I think is a huge plus as well. So you can check it out. Use the link in the description below, athleticgreens.com/more plates, more dates. It gives you a free year supply of this, but also 5 free travel packs of this with your first purchase. So you can check it out if you want to support me and support brands who otherwise stick their neck out for the channel. And, you know, it's obviously much appreciated when you guys use the brands that endorse me and vice versa. So thank you guys, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. If you don't know D-bol, dianabol, methandrostenolone, it is like one of the OG oral steroids for building mass. Deca-D-bol test, classic stack, bro. The latter is a steroid that remains popular among bodybuilders today, which is so comical but also disappointing simultaneously that we are how many years post inception of D-bol and still using it. Like there are essentially no developments when it comes to anabolic androgenic steroids because they were shut down for potentially depending on interpretation of it, unreasonable reasons. But their development in pharmaceutical company pipelines for refinement basically got sidelined decades ago to a point where we are still dealing with the same primitive drugs as we were literally using in like the fucking 70s, bro. Like it's wild. There is no other drug class whereby you are stuck using drugs that were developed like 50 years ago as like your primary best option. There are so many more refined blood pressure modulating options, lipid modulating medications, like things that are so benign at this point from a side effect aspect and so targeted in what they do that they produce like the effect you want with a relative almost minimization to a point of essentially negligible side effect activity with some medications. But then with steroids, muscle building compounds, we are stuck with a lot of garbage, realistically. Like at this point, you could have such clean compounds, and yet we are still using dianabol, test, deca, fucking primo, etc. I'm not to say that those are bad. Like obviously they work well, and it's just the fact that it's quite disappointing that at this point we still have not been able to segregate the androgenicity from compounds. Like even SARMs were kind of like a bit of a disappointment when it came to the ceiling of anabolic activity that could be selectively induced. And then above and beyond that, like the HPTA suppression is essentially unavoidable. SHBG reductions, effects on lipids, like we are still dealing with these same hallmark side effects 50 years later. Disappointing. But anyways, I digress. So the latter is a steroid that remains popular among bodybuilders today. Quote, 100 milligrams a week, he says, of his testosterone usage. And then 3 dianabol a day. So that was 15 milligrams. And that's him literally stating it. Arnold to this guy interviewing him, Ebenezer, I think. That usage also lines up with some of what Schwarzenegger has always hinted in one well-known interview. He didn't say that he took 3 dianabol a day, but he did say that bodybuilders would often discuss their steroid regimens and throw out that number. Schwarzenegger's testosterone use, meanwhile, was in line with what's prescribed to many guys on testosterone replacement therapy today. So this interview is talking about,
did we take steroids? Because now, of course, drugs is such a big issue in sports. And the answer is yes. It was just in the beginning stage because bodybuilders in those days just experimented with it, but it was not illegal. It was like, we talked about it very openly. I mean, anyone that was asked, is you take steroids? Yeah, I take 3 Dianabol a day. Or someone else would say, I would take this, and that. It was not an illegal thing.
So pretty open about saying, an example, 3 Dianabol a day. Is that actually what he took? We'll get into it shortly. But anyways, he basically says he's on a TRT replacement dose, or like even when he was Mr. Olympia, essentially implying I took 100 milligrams of test a week plus 50 milligrams of Dianabol. To be clear though, Schwarzenegger does not want anyone duplicating his regimen, as if it's like the most egregious regimen ever. It's like literally borderline replacement, bro. He pointed out that his usage of the drugs in the 70s was very different. Steroids weren't illegal until Congress passed the Anabolic Steroids Act of 1990. Schwarzenegger also stressed that he only used steroids under doctors' supervision. That's not how he sees the drugs being used by lifters today. Bodybuilding always was considered a safe sport, he says. But now, it's not. Now people are dying. They're dying because of overdoses of drugs and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And they're listening to charlatans. If I want to go and get medical advice from a legitimate doctor, I go to UCLA or I go to the Cleveland Clinic. Schwarzenegger does realize, though, that many won't listen to his exhortations to avoid steroids. After all, on some level, they contributed to his rise through bodybuilding and into Hollywood. Still, he's trying to say all the right things. Don't go there, he says of steroids. Yes, we are at a time now where we always look for the easy way to make money, the fast way to get rich, the easy way to be an influencer. Anytime you abuse the body, you're going to regret it later on. I want young people to know that I have seen people getting kidney transplants and suffering tremendously from it. He also compares himself to a rock climber who takes major risks, then tells others not to. I recognize the fact that, who am I to say this? He says, this is the guy who climbed without a rope. Pretty accurate, bro. So, somebody commented here, he might as well comment on his heart surgeries. First open heart surgery in 1997 was it, and a later one last decade. So coy back in 1997 that it was a family affliction. Right, any proof? We can then assume all dead bodybuilders over the last few years also had a family history of heart problems. He probably could have died in 1997, left for premium healthcare and probably caused by the very steroids he now warns about. Pretty silent back in 1997. He's doing this because the kids are now open about it and it cringed to try to hide it. They made him look like a dinosaur, so he needs to stay relevant or lose viewers for the upcoming streaming shows. So much muscle since the 1970s in popular culture and so much death. I do think that a lot of the passings recently are of excessively high body weights dictated by the standards of the current bodybuilding competitions. Like, you do have to have physiques holding way more tissue than you did, 50 plus years ago or whatever. That is absolutely the case. However, it's not like there was not health ramifications of the use back in the, the 70s, the 80s. Just because there was not social media to highlight the deaths, it doesn't mean they weren't happening. Maybe there's more prevalency, and I would assume there is proportionally given the dosages, escalating to support 300 plus pound body weights. But at the end of the day, just like to assume that bodybuilding was healthy back in the 70s, 80s, like not if you were competing at the Olympia, bro. Like, it's not, being insulin sensitive and being to assimilate glycogen amazingly, like, is great when you have that much muscle, but you were still putting your body in a compromised position from a cardiac health standpoint, from a fertility standpoint. Obviously, there is, significant impacts to your hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis function, unless you attenuate it with ancillaries accordingly, which obviously back then they wouldn't have been doing. No one really knew anything back then other than just like speculative ways to take it based on clinical guidelines and just experimentation and what you hear through the grapevine, which is fine. But to be like, oh, it was healthy back in the day to take gear and now it's like not healthy to take gear. I'm sure that's not exactly what he meant, but back then no one really talked about it. So yeah, it was always considered a safe sport because like no one knew what the fuck was going on. But natural bodybuilding is safe, and it's great to bodybuild. And within reason, you can probably minimize the damage quite significantly from actual like enhanced bodybuilding too, but it's a matter of acknowledging the realities of it at the end of the day. The standards of even the competition that he holds himself is one that holds people to a standard that requires them to use dosages that exceed this. So it's like, is it an even reasonably fair statement to criticize modern bodybuilding for the current standards imposed on the very competitors that he hosts himself at his competition and holds to these standards? Like, it's kind of like a paradoxical mind fuck of a thing to even get on your high horse about. So it's cool that he's transparent about the fact that he used stuff, it existed, but it's like at this point, I think that's kind of just a baseline expectation, and people, you know, he would get fucking lit up if he said otherwise. So what do I think as far as the usage though? You know, is it reasonable to think that he's on like a TRT dose of test and then also adds in 15 milligrams of Dianabol on top? And is that actually matching up with what he said back in his heyday too? Because again, he has talked about this before, just infrequently. So I did a video a long time ago and an article to accompany it called Arnold Schwarzenegger Steroid Cycle Debol and Primobolan. So it is a topic that's heavily debated. What did he use to go from here to here? There's a lot of speculation about what he used, and he's never detailed exactly what he took until this interview with Men's Health, where he said I'm on test I took test and Debol. But there was some pretty strong clues, and I don't necessarily think that test was what he took either. I'm sure he's on TRT now, but that was not the staple drug cocktail in the 70s. In the golden era, it was typically a combination of Deca and Debol Primo, and then Deca was often used as well separately. But from like the prominent bodybuilders, most of them were attesting to the combination of Debol Primo, and then there was, you know, lesser usage of Deca only cycles were, I wouldn't say common, but they were utilized for sure among certain high profile individuals successfully. But it was, you know, a mix of stuff too, and we'll get into that shortly. But it's not like there was a set in stone thing. A lot of these compounds produce these same muscle growth outcomes or similar ones at the end of the day anyways. So it was just a lot about what you could get, I would imagine, and also what your gym bros are using and what they have attested to be successful for them. So if you hear Arnold saying he used 3 Debol tabs a day, like you're pretty fucking sure most of the guys in the gym are going to follow suit and also use Debol. And then what was the complementary anabolic to stack alongside it? Are you going to see like a massive difference between test at 100 milligrams or Primo at 100 milligrams? I would assume the test would actually probably work better in that scenario at that low of a dosage. But I mean, as far as like pure muscle growth outcomes, but it kind of like is up in the air as to, is there even more than a negligible difference when we're talking about these minuscule dosages to begin with? Like, that is a literal replacement dose at the end of the day. So does it matter if he took test or he took Primo or whatever? In his book Total Recall that was published, I believe over a decade ago now, he gives insight into his first steroid cycle a little bit, and it seems to line up with what he said, but he was pretty vague in that one, so it's like it lines up as much as it could. He said, I knew I was already the favorite to win the 67 Mr. Universe competition, but that didn't feel like enough. I wanted to dominate totally. If I'd wowed them with my size and strength before, my plan now was to show up unbelievably bigger and stronger to really blow their minds. So I poured my energy and attention into a training plan I'd worked out with Weg Bennett. For months, I spent most of my earnings on food and vitamins and protein tablets designed to build muscle mass. The drink of choice in this diet was like a nightmarish opposite of beer. Pure brewer's yeast, milk, and raw eggs. Smelled and tasted so vile that Albert sampled it once and threw up, but I was convinced that it worked, and maybe it did. I read everything I could about the training methods of the East Germans and the Soviets. Increasingly, there were rumors that they were using performance-enhancing drugs to get superior results from their weightlifters, shot putters, and swimmers. As soon as I figured out that steroids were the drugs in question, I went to the doctor to try them myself. There were no rules against it. He simply asked, "Can you let me try it?" Arnold asked, and the doctor said sure. He prescribed an injection every 2 weeks and pills to take in between. He told me, take these for 3 months and stop the day the competition is over. Steroids made me hungrier and thirstier and helped me gain weight, though it was mostly water weight, which was not ideal because it interfered with definition. I learned to use the drugs in the final 6 or 8 weeks leading up to a major competition. They could help you win, but the advantage they gave was about the same as having a good suntan. Yeah. Later on, after I retired from bodybuilding, drug use became a major problem in the sport. Guys were taking doses of steroids 20 times the amount of anything we took. And when human growth hormone came onto the scene, things really got out of hand. There were instances where bodybuilders died. I've worked hard since then with the IFBB and other organizations to get drugs banned from the sport. Like, that'll be a fucking productive use of time. The total effect of all these training refinements was that by September 1967, when I got on the plane again for London, I was packing another 10 pounds of muscle. Pretty much the same as having a good suntan though, right? It's interesting how they get progressively more open relative to what is seen as acceptable and expected of them in the current like political perception of current environment. So when he wrote this book like 10 plus years ago, he basically makes it sound like he only used them for 6 to 8 weeks leading up to a show. Then he'd come off, He has one shot every 2 weeks and pills to take in between. You know, obviously that's his first cycle. His doctor probably escalated him, of course, but you know, it's about as good as having a good suntan. If you're pale, it's like going from that to tan is literally the equivalent of being on D-ball and test versus not, apparently, which is obviously nonsensical. But anyways, you know, he wants to get it banned from the sport, but yet he features a competition that is literally holds guys to a standard that they will not win unless they're holding like 250 plus lean, depending on their height, of course. But anyways, it's interesting because there are certain individuals from the same golden era that have trained with them, also attest to their own steroid use and have their own anecdotes about what they took and what they think Arnold took. So Steve Davis was one who outlined golden era cycles in 2012 with a Rick Drazen interview. So this was Steve Davis on the cover of a Muscle and Fitness magazine in 81, I guess. What is this? May. $3 for a magazine, supposedly. And he looks pretty fucking sick. And he says, you know, in my era, it was 3 Dianabol a day and a shot a week. Rick Drazen says that's exactly right. And we heard that certain Austrians were taking 4 Dianabol and a shot a week.
I was talking about
weight loss?
No, I was talking about like steroids.
Oh, I'm sure.
We all did.
Yeah. You know, in my era, it was 3 Dianabol a day and a
Right.
shot a week.
That's exactly right.
And we heard that, you know, certain Austrians were taking 4 Dianabol a day and a shot a week.
Yeah.
Imagine the only dosage escalation you experiment with as a Olympia caliber bodybuilder being, maybe I'll try one more pill. Like that's the furthest you'll go with the lack of information available and knowing that your competitors are doing whatever the fuck it takes to win. You think the furthest you're going to push your body is another 5 milligram pill. You know, is it something that you can even fathom? It's the difference between a guy becoming like a giant action star in Hollywood versus, you know, fading into obscurity. Are you really going to only experiment with one more like Dianabol a day? And I know the outcome of the competition is not like a guaranteed like Hollywood stardom like Arnold got, but I mean, they knew what opportunities could come from being the best in the world. Like it was still a highly sought after title, and they obviously saw how successful Arnold was with it. Do you really think these guys would not have pushed the envelope just a little bit more? I feel like it's unlikely. Now, with that said, some of these guys were more recreational lifters that were taking gear just to look amazing and also, you know, try and get, you know, acting roles and whatnot, but weren't competing on the Olympia stage. But similar anecdotes you see kind of widespread and almost a seeming underplayment intentionally of dosage selection. Rick Drazen, by the way, fucking awesome dude, had a great channel, rest in peace. And you know, that's certainly possible what he used for all we know. He seemed like a pretty candid and forthcoming guy that didn't really have any upside to minimizing his usage, but who the fuck knows at the end of the day? Look at this guy. He looked fucking incredible. And I'm not to say that his dosages weren't, you know, accurate, but he says, now I was there at that time. I know exactly what everyone took. Basically, it was D-ball, Primo, Test, Deca, Winstrol, and Anavar. Those were the main ones. There wasn't anything outside of that. Growth hormone wasn't really used. Mostly tablets. Injectables were the ones I mentioned. The Winstrol, the Dianabol, and Anavar were strictly tablets. There were no injectables at all of that sort. Dianabol was Seba. If you guys know Seba, that was like the OG pharma brand that made it. Came 100 in a bottle, 5 milligrams each. $8 a bottle. Imagine getting pharma grade D-ball for $8 a bottle. Deca was $150 a vial. That's it. Testosterone, let's say 10 cc's of an enanthate was $10. Anavar around the same price, and down the line, nothing was really expensive. Now you have to realize back in 69 and 70s, steroids were not illegal. They were never looked upon as being illegal. There was a doctor's prescription. You could get it pretty easily if you needed it, and then you had it. There were those doctors that were affiliated with Gold's Gym back in those days, and they would just hand it to you. One was a pediatrician who was well known. The other one was a medical doctor who was well known. If you needed something, you got it. So like, if you need something, is it really reasonable that you would just stick to the minimum effective dose that you think everyone else is using, especially if you need an edge on them? Now, from the top of the line bodybuilders, the ones that were competing in the Olympia back then from Golds, their main routine was taking Primobolan, Winstrol, and Deca. Forgot to mention Deca, and not in any great usage. It was like a cc of each, maybe once to twice a week, and that was it. So obviously this is slightly different from the classic, this is what we use, one Primo shot a week or one shot a week of something, and then 3 Dianabol a day. So it was like a cc of each, maybe once or twice a week. So that's a little bit more for sure. People seem to think that some of these guys were taking like 10 cc's a day every day. I never saw it happen. No way in hell that ever happened. Dianabol, no more than 3 to 4 pills a day at most. Anavar was weak, so 6 to 8 pills a day. Winstrol was 4 pills a day. Now I started on D-ball maybe late 60s, I heard about Bill Pearl taking it. 10 days in, I had grown so much it was ridiculous. This is when everything was real. I really grew from that D-ball and they quit making it way back. Maybe mid-80s, SIBA just went out of business and that was it. It became illegal. They said on the bottles themselves that these drugs would not enhance athletic performance. They had to label that on there and then they took it off of there. Primobolan coming out of Germany or Austria, I might say, was probably one of the best things I ever tried. It was given to me by one of our big bodybuilders at the time, in quotes. So, you know, you can infer what that might be. I had great results off that. I got so huge in 2 weeks I could hardly fit into my Volkswagen, and I'm not kidding. That's how big I got just off that and the Dianabol. Never took great amounts. A shot a week, 3 D-ball a day, maybe 2 D-ball a day. So when you asked what these guys took and how much did they take, and did they take a lot? No, it wasn't a lot at all. And I always felt less was more. You didn't need a whole lot to get big. If you took too much, it didn't really work that well. It wasn't any better than taking less. It was available pretty easy. Like I said, it wasn't illegal. Everybody had it. That's how it was. But most of the results in training came from heavy lifting, old school style, and a lot of protein. You can watch that video here, by the way. Rick Drazen steroids in the 70s. He elaborates on it. One of the big bodybuilders gave Rick Primo for the first time, and he was following the classic dosing protocol we've seen mentioned time and time again now. A few D-ball a day and a shot a week of Primo. It's interesting to say the least, and there is other, evidence that has come through the grapevine inferring what might be used or underplaying it, to be determined. Frank Zane's semi-cryptic poem about the golden era steroid cycles. In a book or training diary by Frank Zane called Mind, Body, and Spirit, he put a poem in there that cryptically laid out the cycles of guys in that day, which is like odd to put in poem format that is like some cryptic description, which I don't know, I guess this is the acceptable way to do it back then when it was not as normal to be forthcoming about what you did and transparent about it, but it is what it is. Basically, he says here, Dianabol and Louis, Primobolan on TV, both of whom worked as a team, known for miles around as the best bowlers in town. Primo drove 100 miles a week, combining 15 milligramola bars daily from Diana. Not worried about getting fat, you cannot. Not on that in those days, but that was then, this is now. A growing cast of actors share center stage, all playing the same part at the same time. I awoke amazed, wondering how this ridiculous play isn't dying by now. Frank Zane, page 64, Mind, Body, Spirit. It doesn't take a fucking rocket scientist to figure out what he's saying there. There's some things that are a bit, more misleading or hard to dissect than others, but the first thing, Dianabol, obviously D-ball, Primobolan. Primo drove 100 miles a week. 100 milligrams of Primo per week, presumably, which reinforces the one shot of Primo a week that Arnold supposedly used. Combining 15 milligramola bars daily from Diana. 15 milligrams per day D-ball combined with the weekly shot of Primo. So after the part where he talks about 100 milligrams of Primo and 15 milligrams of Dianabol per day, he says, but that was then, this is now. A growing cast of actors share center stage, all playing the same part at the same time. I awoke amazed, wondering how this ridiculous play isn't dying by now. So I assume this part refers to his perspective on, a lot of these guys in the 70s, 80s, modern day bodybuilding, such a disaster compared to what it was in the golden era. The golden era, everyone trained so hard, no one gave a shit about drugs. It was just the hard training and the protein and the blah, blah, blah. And how much of a travesty, modern bodybuilding is. So I can't help but think chasing mass to be competitive nowadays, insane dosages of drugs that are used at, a top level by some of the guys, being amazed the play isn't dying by now, perhaps alluding to the fact that bodybuilding has continued to remain popular despite an increasing amount of young bodybuilders dropping dead from drug abuse. There's a lot to take in from that poem. That is what I got from it. Let me know what you guys think. But basically, like Rick Drazen, Frank Zane, a lot of these guys, they are also reinforcing this kind of stack, suggesting like 3 to 4 D-ball a day, shot of Primo a week. And it's entirely possible those dosages titrated over years and everyone was just talking about what at a base level everyone told each other they were doing, but everyone was doing way more shit. But anyway, SIBA Dianabol is prescribed in 2.5 to 5 milligram oral tablets. And this is actually an original Dianabol advertisement, which is pretty interesting. SIBA breakdown of why you would want to get it. New Dianabol converts protein to working weight in wasting or debilitated patients. Miss MR, 75 years old, put on 13 and a quarter needed pounds in just 6 weeks. Gains an inch on her right bicep. Forces mercury column 14 millimeter higher in cuff compression test of muscle strength. Feels better than she has in 2 years. Photos used with permission of the patient. New orally effective tissue builder. Imagine just like seeing that in a GNC shelf. This one was tablets 5 milligrams, bottles of 100 and 500. Just an orally effective tissue builder. That's it, bro. It's perfect for 75-year-old women. And then Bayer, Prima, Bull, and Depot were packaged in 1 milliliter glass ampules and contained 100 milligrams of metenolone and enanthate each. Prima, Bull, and Depot by Bayer. So what did Arnold actually take from what we extrapolate out of what his workout partners and stuff literally say? No one seemed to suggest that he used more than 20 milligrams of D-Bull a day and 100 a week of Primo. And then he's saying nowadays, or like literally within the last week, he used a shot of Test a week and 3 tablets of D-Bull. Is that what he actually did? He took a replacement amount of Test, and then literally all the muscle on top of that is built with the D-Ball. I would say pretty unlikely, but it is interesting to hear these guys, how they approach the topic, what their transparency reveals. Are these anecdotes credible in any capacity? Is it a semblance of what they took, or were they taking way more shit and just lying through their teeth? Or are they just such hyper responders that they just, blew up off nothing? It's, hard to believe that, we have literature now to actually show what graded dose response escalations in body composition really look like when using 125 tests, 300 tests, 600 tests. We can kind of see what you can expect from the body and how well tolerated it is in a format of 20 plus weeks of usage. So is it reasonable to think that the guys at their peak, the top bodybuilders on the planet, are just using this? I would say it's highly unlikely. And it's just interesting though to hear them try to keep up the story years later, or I don't know. But there are other individuals who were around in that heyday that through the grapevine have suggested Arnold was using upwards of wild dosages, upwards of like 1,000 milligrams of Primo a week, 100 milligrams of D-Bull a day, literally slamming a copious amounts to the point that you could more wrap your head around, I guess, that these are the top bodybuilders on the planet. It's just that seems like such an extreme on both ends though, 100 milligrams of D-Bull a day, but it's not like anyone was telling them otherwise. So is it unreasonable to think they did that too? Just popping 20 D-Bull tablets a day. To be honest, I could almost wrap my head more around that for a top Olympia caliber person than the 3, but is there, truth in the middle? Are they actually doing essentially nothing? We just can't fathom it because our genetics are so inferior. It's wild shit, and obviously the gear was way better back then. It's not that hard to get good gear now, to be honest though, if you actually are reasonably connected, and you can test it and get it checked and have corresponding blood work to actually reinforce if your test is what it is at the right dosage, and get, actual HPLC testing of your shit to actually see it is what it is too from UGLs. It's not that hard to get high quality shit. So I always, brush off the idea that, oh, the drugs were so high quality back then, so that's why you could get away with essentially nothing. Drugs work now too, and you can get drugs that are accurately dosed and do what they're supposed to do just the same. It's not like it's a fucking impossible task to get D-Bull. It's not the most expensive drug on the planet, and getting it tested is not impossible either. So I don't know. I kind of don't really take that as a strong point to suggest the credibility of statements of oh, you just need 100 milligrams a week and you look like these guys. But with that said, you never know. It's interesting nonetheless to hear him be forthcoming about at least saying, yeah, I was on it. Here's what my dosages were. Here's the compounds I used. I imagine his dosages now are probably 100 tests a week, and some longevity enhancing things to support, vitality, as stretch out the years as much as he can. But one thing that is at least a takeaway, despite the fact that I don't know if it's really a holier than thou attitude that these guys have about modern bodybuilding, or they just or they're actually genuinely concerned, or what it is. But at the end of the day, fortunately, the reality of the situation is a lot of guys are going to expose themselves to these drugs. No ifs, ands, or buts. It will happen. A lot of people will be using this stuff and at dosages exceeding this to be competitive on stage or achieve some performance metric in sport, or fill in the blank reason why they do it. But more education is coming out about how to attenuate the damage of this stuff, which is what I see as at least a silver lining to this stuff, is understanding how it all works in the body and what the true risks are and where the minimum effective dosages lie, and actually having some literature to reinforce assumptions about different compounds and how they'll affect you and whatnot. And at the end of the day, at least one takeaway I want to give in this video is stay on top of your blood pressure from day one and your lipids from day one if you are going to use this stuff. At the end of the day, the main things that will fuck you as a bodybuilder are going to be your blood pressure, which often goes overlooked, sleep apnea as well, which indirectly is going to exacerbate the detriment of, blood pressure modulation problems and lipid metabolism and just having insulin sensitivity metrics and whatnot. Like, these things are all getting fucked up by bad sleep. So sleep apnea is kind of like a mechanical thing to take it into account if you're just a larger person. But other than that, like from an actual biomarkers perspective and actual biofeedback perspective and whatnot, the main things to stay on top of are, I would say, ApoB in your blood work. If you have a level of ApoB that is otherwise not representative of having significant atherogenic potential, the likelihood of you having a cardiovascular event in young age that is enhanced by the use of anabolic steroids and whatnot, like these things are going to have a negative impact on your lipids at the end of the day. But staying on top of the modulation of that ApoB level as you expose yourself to huge amounts of food, drugs, whatever it is, managing that to a level that otherwise makes atherosclerosis much less likely to occur and at some level almost impossible to manifest in significant quantities whatsoever. That is a huge lever to pull that a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to oversee and actually manage should proper education be put out around this subject matter. So lipid management is huge and needs to be taken from day one of exposure. Frankly, a lot of naturals need to do this shit too, because they are going to otherwise, very likely, of all of the causes of death, cardiovascular disease is the number one likely outcome for death in every single individual. And when I say that, the verbiage was probably poor on that, but when I say that, I mean the leading cause of death is cardiovascular disease. So the likelihood is high of your risk, getting that taken care of, is something that is actually manageable, predictable. We understand it with greater complexity than anything to do with the cancer side. You can at least have some peace of mind that cardiovascular disease is a manageable disease, fortunately, through modern medicine and diet practices, sleep hygiene, lifestyle, etc. But especially in the enhanced bodybuilding side, pharmacology, it's wild how many guys I will see take fucking Tren, but then are worried about taking a Zetamib or a baby statin or a Repatha or something. You need to get this shit looked at. It is not going to ruin your gains to be on a lipid modulating medication, especially with how refined these compounds have become. Similar to what I said at the beginning of the video, we're using anabolic steroids from the fucking 70s, but then we're worried about some drug that was created recently for lipid modulation, not seeing the trees through the forest, or whatever the saying is that I can never remember on this video. You are not seeing the forest through the trees, or the trees through the forest. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say though. Anyways, managing atherosclerotic potential at the end of the day is something that is very, very manageable, and you can see in real time the manifestation of what's going on in your blood work. And if you want a real-time assessment of soft plaque accumulation in your arteries, you can get a CT angiogram, or you can get a coronary artery calcium score done, although I don't put as much merit into those for young bodybuilders who likely don't have significant calcification to even measure. And it's kind of like a byproduct aftermath effect anyways, where you're seeing this is the remnant manifestation of damage that has occurred already. You want to get there before anything builds up, ideally. So that is where you manage your lipids accordingly based on blood work, and from there it becomes a lot more difficult to randomly have a jammer when in reality it's not actually random. You've been building it up for years. So get on that shit early is what I would say. In addition, blood pressure modulation. Nothing is going to fuck your heart up from a morphology and function standpoint more than the actual blood pressure enhancement of anabolic androgenic steroids, enhanced body weights. Water retention caused by some of the compounds can be problematic. At the end of the day, if you are staying on top of your blood pressure, which is manageable through basic diet principles, lifestyle, sleep hygiene, making sure you don't have sleep apnea, and if you do, you get it taken care of. But also, if warranted, pharmacology, angiotensin receptor blockers, stuff of this nature is relatively benign. Again, not for every single person. These drugs do have side effects too, and you should be mindful and educated about how they work. But if you have a perfect blood pressure and you have a perfect lipid panel, it becomes a lot more difficult to die prematurely as a bodybuilder than you would otherwise. Like, what do most bodybuilders die from? It is a cardiovascular related incident almost every single time. There are very few guys that are dying from like acute liver failure or, kidney damage. Usually comes as a downstream consequence of blood pressure issues. At the end of the day, if you were taking care of your blood pressure and it is in check, if you are taking care of your lipids and they are in check, and when I say taking care of them, I mean assessing them in real time frequently and making sure that you have a dialed in and otherwise nearly risk-free, ideally, ApoB number. You don't have a genetic predisposition to Lp(a), and if you do, you should like absolutely think about if bodybuilding is something worth pursuing if you're enhanced. And having a clean, bill of metabolic health and flexibility, having a CBC panel that is not representative of like you're gonna have a fucking jammer from blood viscosity metrics. Like, just having a basic overview. A lot of that stuff is very easily correctable, but goes overlooked from lack of proactive attention paid to this stuff at the end of the day, and also just like wanting to bury your head in the sand or not even knowing what to look for. And it's absolutely critical that you look at this stuff, even if you're natural too. Like, as I say this, people are probably like, wow, it's not even relevant for me because I don't take gear, I don't gotta worry about it. Leading cause of death, cardiovascular disease. Getting your blood pressure in check, monitoring it regularly, lipid management, and then down like almost a tier below that, but also, contributing. I don't want to downplay how important it is, but, insulin sensitivity metrics and making sure you are metabolically healthy and fit. And then, all the other stuff that comes along with that from a, blood count perspective. Viscosity metrics is more of a concern in enhanced guys, but at the end of the day, like the lipids, the blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, if these things are dialed, it becomes a lot harder to die. That is something that is the biggest takeaway at the end of the day. And these are things that are very, very manageable, and more care needs to be taken. And a lot of bodybuilders could otherwise avoid premature death should they have taken these things seriously from the get-go. That is the main takeaway. And hopefully you guys learned something, found it entertaining. Let me know what you think about Arnold's disclosure of what he's doing. What do you think he actually did? Do you think he's just severely underplaying his use? And it's hard to even know what to make of what these guys say half the time, because it's like, they're like coming across as transparent, but at the same time, it's like, damn, dude, I have a very hard time wrapping my head around what you're saying right now, because it seems like you almost might as well just tell me like fucking nothing. It's like, that's how mind-blowing it seems to me that somebody could otherwise claim top physique on the planet in an enhanced sport, literally a sport around building your physique and hypertrophy, using what is essentially 15 milligrams of D-bol a day. Because that is like above and beyond your 100 milligrams of replacement test. Like, you are only in enhanced territory with the D-bol at that point, essentially, above and beyond what like your natural potential would be. To some extent, like I think 100 milligrams, I forget what the studies show, but in the graded dose response studies, it's like at 125 milligrams, I think there was like a slight increase in lean tissue, but it was like not that significant to where it's essentially negligible. The only thing really in that regimen then is like the D-bol is performance enhancing, muscle building potential above baseline. And like, are you gonna get there on 15? I don't fucking know, dude. That's wild. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. All the comments help the algorithm, are much appreciated. Like, subscribe. Actually subscribe too. Like I mentioned, most videos, I think at this point, the number of people that watch that are not subscribed versus subscribed, we got to get that number up to some proportion that I have no idea what is actually good. I just know that people mention it in videos now. And getting the number up is important, because it tells YouTube these are videos that should otherwise be pushed to a new audience. So, if you want to see more deep dives into pharmacology, nerding out on shit like this, learning about preventative medicine too, what I'm highly passionate about, drop a sub. Join the MPMD club. I don't know. I don't think I've ever called us anything, to be honest. I don't have a name for us. But anyway, sub if you want to support me, anything in the video description below. And I would highly recommend, if you don't have a baseline panel done, go to merrickhealth.com, get a comprehensive or complete panel, or just order single biomarkers if you already know what to look for. But we have cost-efficient, pre-designed panels that I've audited myself, along with multiple MDs, DOs, NPs, like people I defer to for keeping up with my own education and oversee the clients of Merrick Health. Like, we have medical providers who are on the cutting edge of this stuff, and our panels are always being refined and updated accordingly with the most cutting edge literature to make sure we are the most capable of assessing all diagnostic metrics that are relevant for preventative medicine at the end of the day. So if you want to get high quality medical oversight, we offer that as well, but also just get like a baseline panel done if you have not. That's like the best gift you could give yourself, and stay on top of this stuff. Like seriously, it's the most controllable thing we have from a disease aspect that is the most devastating is cardiovascular disease, and staying on top of that is absolutely worthwhile. So check it out, and anything else that supports me, it's down there. And thank you guys for watching. I will talk to you guys soon.